Greetings, folks. The New Testament lesson today is from Galatians chapter 6, Paul's letter to the Galatians, chapter 6, verses 1 to 6 and 7 to 16. And if we look at that text, it seems that Paul is contradicting himself, because verses 2 and 5 seem as though they're in opposition to each other. In verse 2, Paul says, "Bear one another's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." Bear one another's burdens, support each other, care for each other, help each other, carry your brother or your sister's load, or help them with it as much as you can. And then verse 5 says, "For all must carry their own loads." The first text seems to suggest that we are responsible for each other, and we need to acknowledge that, and we need to take care of each other, that we are not independent but interdependent, and we need to be able to draw on each other and rely on each other and support each other. And the second text seems to suggest that we are responsible for ourselves. Everyone must carry their own load. They must do what has been given to them to do, and they must be able to handle it, their own responsibilities. But both sides of the coin are true. We must do what we can to support one another, sharing our struggles and trying to help each other practically and emotionally and so on, encouraging each other, and more than that, doing things practically to help each other. As I've said a few times over the past couple of years, when I have been offering a weekly message, we must resist the temptation to become focused entirely on our own situation, our own problems, our own needs, and our own challenges. As much as we struggle in difficult times, we've got to try to keep looking outward and keep reaching outward. Everyone suffered during the COVID pandemic and the related lockdowns, but millions of people suffered much more than many of us did. Millions of people carried much heavier burdens than we did during hard lockdowns. Now, load shedding seems to be worse than ever, and it's a huge inconvenience, and the corruption and neglect and inefficiency that have brought this upon us is infuriating. And there's a huge financial struggle for many of us because of the impact of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, his vicious and inexcusable war. Fuel is increasingly unaffordable for many people, and the ever-increasing cost of food and household necessities must be making people more desperate than ever. If we are feeling overwhelmed and furious and very discontented with our lot, imagine the sufferings of millions of people in our country and on our continent, and also in other parts of the world. So, we go back to that text. Bear one another's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. The word to bear in Greek is bastazo, which means to carry, to take up, or even to remove. So carry one another's burdens, take up one another's burdens, try to remove one another's burdens. Somehow we have to try to relieve the enormous burdens that other people are experiencing. It has got to be more than just words, and we understand that very well. A burden is a weight that has got great personal significance for the person bearing that burden. It might be a character flaw. It might be some struggle in life, financial or something else. It might be something that they are morally obliged to do, and that is not easy to cope with. It's not easy to know who we should help and how we should help and when we should help. But I imagine this text, Galatians chapter 6, is suggesting that there is some kind of relationship with the person who is struggling. We are acquainted with that person, we're involved with them, and we should instinctively feel compassion and try to relieve their burden. Earlier in this passage from Galatians, Paul has said, if anyone is detected in a transgression, you who have received the Spirit should restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness. We have a responsibility to help someone who has strayed back onto the right path. This might mean confrontation with the intention of helping that person to acknowledge their error, leading ultimately, we hope and pray, to changed behavior. This is difficult to do, to try to help someone to come back onto the right track. And it's really difficult to do this, and most of us balk at the idea of doing it. And to be able to do that humbly and gently, so that the person doesn't think we have a superior attitude, a better than thou attitude. And when we see somebody embroiled in some shady stuff or something really undesirable, distasteful, or when we see somebody veer off the path, most of us would choose to shake our heads and walk away. But how can we help each other towards healing and increased spiritual and emotional health? I don't think Paul is talking here about random people we might meet begging at traffic intersections, those people who are perhaps complete strangers to us, although those people also need help and encouragement and direction. But in this context, I think Paul is speaking about people that we know and we are in some kind of relationship with. We don't really have any authority to get involved in the lives of people who are strangers to us, unless, of course, it's somebody who is declaring their need of help. Every person carries some kind of burden or burdens. People we know are suffering from cancer. A young couple desperately wanting a child, but it's not happening. Some people having trouble with family relationships and really struggling to know what to do. There's underlying tension in a lot of relationships. On the surface, things look really good and people are apparently happy and full of jokes, but underneath we might sense that they are struggling with some deep issues that perhaps they're not really being honest about and trying to work through. Some people we know have emotional scars of one kind or another. Some people are depressed and anxious. To carry each other's burdens suggests that we somehow suffer along with those people who are struggling. I was taught years ago, decades ago, that as a priest, one must be emotionally detached from people that one is ministering to or counseling, whatever it might be. Otherwise, the priest will be overburdened and suffer from stress and possibly burnout. But how is it possible to avoid taking on, to some extent, other people's distress and anguish? I've never found that possible, that I'm able to be emotionally detached and to be kind of involved with a person, but just kind of keeping my distance so that I don't feel their pain and I don't take on their burden. So, bear each other's burdens. Then the other side of the coin is the need for people to take responsibility for their lives and their situation. We do people no favors if we constantly encourage irresponsibility and dependence. To some extent, we all have to lie in the bed that we have made. There's a fine line between helping people out and encouraging them to rely on the help that other people offer, so they never take responsibility for themselves and their lives. I remember years ago reading a book about marriage, and the author observed that no partner in a marriage can be held responsible for their spouse's happiness. I think that is really important and liberating. Of course, we need to be supportive and affirming, and we need to work things out together, and we need to help each other towards growth and healing and maturity. Similarly, the role of a counselor is to empower the client to make their own decisions about how to handle their situation and what they should do. It is not right, generally speaking, for a counselor to say, right, I've listened to you, I've heard what you've said, now here, go and do this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I must confess that sometimes I have done that, and some people have found it quite helpful, but probably the best counseling is where we empower people to see more clearly their own situation, so that they can say, oh, what about this? What about trying that? There are things I can do. It is agonizing to see other people struggle and force oneself to stand back so that they can make their own way in life. I think particularly of children. If we are constantly intervening, bailing our children out of trouble, mollycoddling, they will never be responsible and mature. All of us have burdens that are not transferable. They're our own burdens, and other people can't really carry them for us or help us to carry them because we're all in our own particular situations in life, and we have our own responsibilities, our own obligations that are entirely personal. And I cannot take responsibility for your behavior, ultimately. But I can seek to come alongside you to help you to bear the weight of something that is burdensome. In our society, too, there is a fine line between acknowledging the ongoing impact of decades of apartheid and centuries of racial discrimination. That's on the one hand, and on the other hand, excusing people who might be lazy and expecting handouts continually instead of taking responsibility for their own lives. It's always tempting to find scapegoats to bear the blame for our personal failure or mistakes that we make. It's always easy to blame the social injustices that have forced us into a situation or forced us to make unwise decisions and so on. But we know that it is not right that people should be excused all the time and exonerated from blame. It's not right that we should be blaming society and blaming our parents and blaming people who've failed us and hurt us and all the rest of that. It doesn't help anyone to encourage them to see themselves as victims. And we all need to know that we can change our lives. One of the most important things, I think, in South Africa today, where a lot of people have not been empowered, they have been disempowered, they, in the past, have not felt that they have the possibility of being proactive and making some decisions, and so much depends on whether we have the confidence and the ability to be proactive and to get out there and to do something. And there are a lot of people who feel paralyzed. And so what we need to try to do is to help people to know that there are possibilities, that there are changes that can be made in their situation, that they can make decisions which affect their future positively. So, bear one another's burdens, but don't carry their load. Help, support, encourage, do what you can to help other people to cope with whatever it is they have to cope with, but know the boundaries. Don't encourage dependency. Don't bail people out. Know when to back off. Know when it is important for the person to resolve their own issues, to work through stuff, and not to kind of come in and take over and be their salvation. Ultimately, we won't be their salvation at all. We'll be their ruin if we continue to bail people out, family members or other people. We need to sometimes just release them and take a step back. And we need to acknowledge our responsibilities too, and make sure that we are doing what we need to do, doing what we can do with what we have, that we also are being proactive and trying to make things work. And so there's no point in whining about the situation we find ourselves in. Maybe there are things that we can change, or things we need to expose, things we need to take action against. But it doesn't help to kind of sit back whining and grumbling and being discontented. We need to know what we can do, what we're able to do, what we have the power to do for ourselves, and how best we can come alongside other people to help them to carry their particular burdens. So, very difficult topic, and as I say, Paul seems to contradict himself, but I think both sides of the coin are valid. We need to help each other along, and also ultimately we have to carry our own load. So may God guide us by his Spirit as we seek to be faithful to this teaching, and may God bless you. Amen.